All right, video 3 of this mini series, and now I'm going to talk about prime, conversion, product, and period cost. So let's start with prime and conversion costs. What are they? Well, prime costs is basically the costs of direct materials plus direct labor costs. And prime here mean basically the fact that they are prime to the production of the product. They're extremely important, or they represent a vast majority of the percentage that it takes to create the product. So on the example we've been using for the purse factory, in other words, for the factory that creates these purses, and we have two different important materials. We have the lining and the leather, but we also have the factory. In terms of the factory, we have two departments, two types of people working, the ones cutting the pieces and the ones actually sewing the pieces. So what we would see is that prime costs will be direct material costs plus direct labor costs, and I put the examples here. The leather, all right, so I have here the leather, and I have here the sewing department, for example. Conversion costs, on the other hand, is the cost that it takes me to convert raw materials into the finished product, and that will be the direct labor cost plus the factory overhead cost. So once again, I have here the example direct labor and the factory overhead. And this means one thing, means that direct labor cost is both a prime cost and a conversion cost, and therefore it means that direct labor cost will affect on both sides. It's both a very important component of the total cost, but at the same time as well, it's something that basically is on the process, is one of the things that creates the transformation from raw material to finished product. So the other different category of product we have, or the different way that we have to divide product cost to divide costs, sorry, is product cost and period cost. Now, costs therefore can be divided into two different ways. Like I said, product costs is costs associated with the product. Period costs is costs associated with the normal cycle of the business. For product costs, we already covered them. We have direct materials, direct labor, and factory overhead costs. I mentioned them before in a previous video. But for period costs, we have selling expenses and we have administrative expenses. Okay, what does that mean? It means that basically selling expenses is any cost that we have related to marketing and delivering the product to the customer. Administrative expenses is any expenses that are related to management of the business, and therefore that's how we divide the expenses related to general management of the business. So for example, the supervisor expense we had before, it would be considered an administrative expense. So to give you some examples of different types of cost in each one of these categories. So for example, the cost of leather and the cost of the lining would be a direct material cost. The cost of people working on the cutting department and the cost of people working on the sewing department would be a direct labor cost. The cost of electricity and the cost, for example, of the janitor of the factory would be factory overhead cost. The cost of selling expenses, for example, the cost of doing advertisement or commissions that we pay to the salespeople, those would be selling expenses. And in terms of administrative expense, for example, anyone working on the office, on the part, for example, of generating documents would be administrative expense, but also, for example, office supplies, those would also be administrative expense. So what we see here is that the costs can be divided into different paths. First of all, we have to determine for every cost, is this something associated with the product or is this something associated with management of the business? If it's associated with the management of the business, is it a selling expense or is it an administrative expense? And this information later on will go into the income statement, by the way. Product costs, on the other hand, stuff related, for example, to inventory or cost of goods sold, all right? Those are things that will affect different documents later on. Inventory will affect our balance sheet, while the cost of goods sold will affect our income statement. But that's a topic for a video later on. So we learn now that there are different ways as well to divide costs. Okay, we can divide them into prime costs. Those would be any direct material cost, and direct labor cost is a prime cost, or conversion cost, and conversion cost is the direct labor cost and plus the factory overhead cost. Besides that, I can also divide my costs, into two main categories: product costs, or the other one, which is period costs. Product costs is our direct material costs, our direct labor costs, and our factory overhead costs, while period costs is our selling expenses and our administrative expenses. And that's the topic, that's the summary for today. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you on the next video. Let me know in the comment section below if you have any questions you would like to ask.